you start to wonder, what is God's role in this? Is he allowing this to happen, or is he doing this? I think is the thing you start to question.
Hello, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney. I am seriously so excited to give you Kim's special topic episode all about the evolution of her faith in God that occurred because of her daughter and the things that they've gone through together. If you haven't caught her story episode yet, I encourage you to hit pause on this episode, go back and listen to that one first, and then come back to this one. It will make this episode a lot more meaningful if you get to know Kim and her story a bit first. So when I was first conceptualizing this podcast and envisioning each of you, my dear listeners, I made a very intentional decision to keep it a non-religious podcast. I am aware of other podcasts similar to mine that explore and talk about God and faith in context of our parenting journeys. And I think that is needed in this space. But I also see the value and need for a podcast that is inclusive to all religious and non-religious backgrounds as well. I have no shame in disclosing that I am a deeply religious person and I'm very involved in my church. And up to this point, I've kind of danced around that aspect of my journey. But this episode is a chance for us to go all in and to examine religious beliefs and faith as a very real part of some of our journeys, as is the case with Kim and with me. And, I love to keep it relatable. But as with all episodes, this one is only representative of a couple of women's takes on the universe and God, and it is not intended to represent each of your own opinions and belief system, which would be an impossible task anyway. My hope for this episode is that it will kind of provoke you to really examine and sit with your own personal beliefs about the universe and to recall what part that has played in your parenting journey, and vice versa, to ponder what part your parenting journey has played in your own personal beliefs about the universe. This episode is a first of its kind because it is split into a part 1 and part 2. This was a judgment call on my part because while I'm typically a ruthless editor, cutting out fluff so it really packs a punch, it was clear that all of our conversation needed to be included this time around. So in part 1, which you are listening to today, Kim shares how her belief in and about God shifted when Julianne was born, the anger and betrayal she felt, and the role that an incredibly scary accident with her daughter played as a kind of turning point in her previous understanding or beliefs about God. In part 2, releasing next week, she goes into depth about her altered view of God and a faith that is stronger than ever before. Now, I personally love Kim's expression of this because so much of it lined up and resonated with my own personal experiences. She is so articulate of things that are often really hard to put into words. I hope this episode is as meaningful to you as it was for me. And again, I cannot say it loud enough. If the things we say do not align with your own personal beliefs or even contradicts them, I see you. The purpose of this podcast is never to suggest that there is one right way to process our experiences. This is simply one woman's deeply personal experiences and evolution of faith, and it is so beautiful. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hi, Kim. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks.
I'm really excited to talk about your special topic, all about your faith in God and how that has evolved because of Julianne and everything that has happened in regards to her diagnosis. I think everyone's religious beliefs or, beliefs about the universe or whatever you may call them, I think they all are probably affected by things like this, for better, for worse, like maybe realizing like, well, maybe I don't believe that stuff anymore, or wow, I need this more than ever. And so I acknowledge that this is like one outcome that can happen or does happen. And I'm just really excited to dive in and really explore, what this was like for you and how your faith was affected. And I would love to start out with how you would describe your faith in God specifically before Julianne was born. So kind of our before scene.
Mm-hmm. So I grew up with a pastor for a dad. So
oh, wow.
Grew up in the church. I never knew anything different, to the point where my husband still laughs at me. We grew up with all of our Christmas presents being from Jesus, and Santa Claus was just his helper.
Oh, cute.
He's just the delivery man.
That's too cute.
Like things like that. Definitely grew up with that faith being strongly instilled in us from an early age. But I will say, I went to college, and that was when I left my small hometown of Casper, Wyoming, and came to a big place like Texas. Went to a big college, and my faith was just kind of in the back seat for a long time. I didn't go to church as often. I tried, but I would say it definitely took a back seat in my life. And kind of going into marrying my husband and my relationship with my husband, we came from two different backgrounds. He grew up Catholic, I grew up Baptist. And so, we knew that we had the same faith at its core, but, I had definitely cooled off, is what I'm trying to say. I had cooled off on my faith. I still prayed. I still went to church. I still had this strong faith that God is who he says he is. But I don't think I really understood the depth of what actually having faith means and what, God's role in my life really was. He was just kind of this thing that I always grown up with, this thing that I knew well, but that was it, I think.
Yeah, totally. I totally know what you're saying. I mean, like, honestly, I that resonates with me to the level of like, I think when we don't feel like we need God, it's harder to really have that relationship. Like if things are peachy, it's kind of like, oh yay, like God. But like, I think, I don't know, like, I think it's just kind of part of human nature that like, if we do have that belief system, and then when something hard happens, it's like, oh yeah, like I need you right now. Like I need help right now. And I think that can be really strengthening of that relationship. Or it can be like, why'd you do this to me? So it really can go both ways. So I would love to know, was there an evolution that happened immediately when you found out about Julianne? Was it kind of like an eventual thing for you? Like, how did that work for you?
Yeah, I would say it was definitely an evolution that took time. When Julianne was first born, like I said, I had grown up in the church. I thought I had this really strong faith because I knew who God was, and I'd always grown up with it, and I went to church and all these things. So I didn't ever see a problem with my relationship with God. But when Julianne was born, I'm not gonna lie, I was furious. Like I was so angry with God, like to the point where I wanted to scream. Like I wanted to yell at the sky. And I was furious because I felt like all those emotions, like you said, I felt like, why? And it wasn't even why me, it was why her. It was more why Julianne. And the part that really upset me was, like I said, I thought I had a great relationship with Christ in my life, and I thought everything was fine. When I was in labor, when Julianne was born, those hours that I was waiting for my contractions to reach the level that we need them to be. I remember I was laying, and I will never forget this moment. I was laying in the hospital bed and I was holding my belly and I was, counting the minutes between my contractions. And I just remember praying and telling God that this child is yours. Do with her what you will. Like, I promise I will raise her to love you, to know you. I made like this dedication prayer of, thank you for giving me this child. Thank you for making me a mom. Thank you for all these things. I'm so grateful. And I was dedicating Julianne to him in prayer. And then for me to find out that she had broken her arm and we're, headed down this path of diagnosis, I felt like God had betrayed me. Like he had stabbed me in the back. Like I just spent all this time like telling you that, I'm going to make the most of this child and that I will raise her in your word and all this other stuff, making this dedication prayer. And then for something like this to happen, I was furious. And yeah, those were all the emotions that I was feeling in those early days. And one thing that really resonated with me until today was my brother actually. I remember calling him from the hospital one night and I was just so broken and confused and angry with God. And I believed at that point, God doesn't exist. Like this is a joke. And my brother sent me a passage from the Bible where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's crying and he's praying to God, please let this cup pass from me. If you're familiar with that passage. And obviously it doesn't. That's not the will of God in that moment. And he goes on to be crucified and dies for all of our sakes. And I remember my brother told me to read that. And he said, I know you're angry right now. And I know you're confused. And you wish that this cup would pass from you as well. But just know that Jesus was in that same position. He was scared. He was confused. And he knew that there was a hard road ahead of him and there was pain to come. And yet he still trusted and he went on. And obviously in that moment, it didn't help. I'm not going to lie, in that moment, it didn't help. I was upset and I didn't see how that is going to help me. Because like you said, it's easier said than done. But for a while, I was just angry.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think that makes so much sense that it was so magnified by the dedication prayer that you made. Like, like you said, it was like he stabbed you in the back or betrayed you. Like right after you, it was obvious that you were going to raise her in a way that like would respect him and honor him. And then maybe to feel like, well, you're not respecting me or honoring me. Like, why would you do this to us? I think that probably made it so poignant for you and so painful. And especially in that moment where like, I'm sure that's when you really needed him. And so to feel all of a sudden this like, what the heck? Like, that relationship and in some ways shattered or like really altered when you needed him most probably added to the pain so much more.
And, my initial reaction when, they first started talking to us about her potential diagnosis and she was in the NICU, et cetera, obviously my initial reaction was to pray. Like I prayed and prayed and prayed every second that I was awake. I was praying that she'd be okay. That a miracle would happen and she would be fine. Her arm would heal. And even if she did have OI, which is osteogenesis imperfecta, that we wouldn't have a fracture for a really long time. And she would recover and we'd be out of here and everything would just be fine. But one moment that I remember in the hospital was I read on Google that one of the symptoms of OI was blue sclera, which has to do with their collagen because they produce collagen differently than we do. And so it's the whites of your eyes are blue. And I remember sitting in the pick you at that moment. And I was looking at her, and she had woken up, and she looked to the side, and I just saw the whites of her eyes, and they were really blue. And I had been obviously praying and praying and praying, this is going to be fine. Please show me that this is going to be fine. And as soon as I saw that, I just remember like breaking down, because it almost felt like a sign, it almost felt like a punch in the gut. Like, no, this is your reality. This is what's happening, and you need to get on board. So yeah, it was tough in those early times. And I think that probably goes for a lot of people, especially if you grow up with a faith and then something changes like this in your life, where you start to wonder, what is God's role in this? Mm-hmm. Is he allowing this to happen, or is he doing this? I think is the thing you start to question.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really big question that can have a lot of sway on, what you do with that information. Mm-hmm. Of, did he do this to Kimball or Julianne, or is he allowing it to happen? And
if so, why?
Yeah. Yeah. And like, well, you obviously could just fix this, right? Like, especially if you read the Bible and stuff like that, like you're very aware of these miracles that happen in those books. And then also I was raised in a very Christian household too. And like, you're constantly talking about the miracles, like, oh, he healed this person and I prayed for this and that happened and it was so awesome. I knew he loved me. I think that's one thing that really got me was he healed or, fixed the issue, but especially healing, because that's very directly related, to the medical issues and stuff. And I just knew he loved me because he healed me or healed my child or whatever. In fact, I even had an experience with my best friend while I was pregnant with Kimball. She really went through it with me, and like he was born with all this medical stuff, and then she was pregnant and found out that she had this big birth defect, and that was crazy. And I was like, wow, we'll be here for each other. And then she went on to like have like the best case scenario, like basic. I mean, like it was hard for them, but like she was like, yeah, like I was able to breastfeed, but they said she would have to be tube fed, and it was because we prayed and we got this miracle, and it was just so wonderful. And I was sitting there like, ouch. Like it hurt so bad to hear that, because it was like, do I not have enough faith? Is that why Kimball is still like having all these medical issues and struggling and suffering way more than her daughter? So is it my fault? Is it because he loves her more than me? Is it, this comparison of like miracles, or like I prayed and it worked out? I think it's really easy to be like, so if God loves us, it works out. If God loves us, it's not hard, which I don't know if this is the conclusion you came to, but I have, is like, that's not true. But it's hard when you're watching other people, or you've heard of other people being healed, and you're like, I know this would be easy for you. Like, I have faith in that. Why won't you fix it?
Absolutely. Well, and again, like I said, for a while up to that point, when I left my small town, I feel like my faith did cool off for a long time. And I made my share of mistakes. And when I found out that, she had this diagnosis, my immediate thought was, is it because of what I did? Is it because of my mistakes? And again, like I said, that's why my concern wasn't, why are you doing this to me? It was, why are you allowing this to happen to her? She's innocent. She's not sinned a day in her life. She's so brand new to this world. She hasn't done anything. She didn't choose to come, like, I just was so confused, like why? Like you said, automatically you start to question, is it because of me? Is it because of God's feelings towards me, or God's love for me, or my sins against God? You start to wonder if, your situation is correlated somehow to how he's feeling about you, or how he loves you and cares for you.
Yeah, which is freaking painful. Like to feel like you caused it in that way, I think is the worst. And, it really reminds me of in the Bible, one of the miracles where Christ heals a blind man. And I remember I read this when Kimball was really little, and it really hit me. But they were like, okay, who sinned? Like, whose fault is it that he's blind? Did he sin? Is it his parents' sin?
Yeah.
Like, whose sin is this? Like, there must be some kind of sin that caused being blind, which I'll say too, like in that day and age, you were a beggar and that
Right.
was it. Like, they didn't have these systems to help. They didn't have technology. So like just picturing that too in context, but like where he was like, oh, neither one sinned. It's so that God can show forth his power. And I paraphrase. I don't remember exactly how he said it,
Yeah.
but that really struck me because I was like, well, so like traditionally you would think, okay, so like then he'll heal Kimball and that'll be like showing his power. Or you'd be like, well, in what other ways could this experience with Kimball and his disability and everything like be showing forth of God's power in my life and for
Mhm.
others too? And that's been an interesting question to have when it's not like responded with like the traditional, like he was healed or it was fixed.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And again, even with that, it's hard. Those are like really deep, deep feelings that you have to wrestle with of, okay, well, and if you are doing this to show your power, like, why?
Yeah.
Why this? Why this?
Yeah.
And again, like for me, it was hard because she was just so tiny and she was going through so much difficulty and pain that I was like, okay, break her arm once, but break both of them, break her legs. Like, enough is enough. I remember like feeling that way, like, and asking God, like, enough, enough. I felt like he was picking on me almost, or
Mhm.
not me, but like Julianne. I was like, stop.
Yeah.
And you start to feel that way when you have like back to back situations like that. So, yeah, those are really such deep feelings to have to wrestle with.
Yeah. It's like mama bear. It's like if you feel like he's the one attacking your child, and it's like, oh, watch out. Like, like,
Yes.
stop doing that.
Quit. Yes, absolutely.
Mm. So yeah, that makes so much sense. So do you feel like there was like a turning point for you where you were kind of like making better terms with him, or were like something shifted for you?
Um, yes. So I feel like, again, it was an evolution for sure. Like, I would go back and forth. I would
Mm.
go back and forth from being angry to feeling just absolutely vulnerable. I remember feeling, especially like that day that I mentioned with the blue sclera that I noticed in her eyes, and everything just felt almost like a sign, like I was being hit with reality once again. And it was like another punch to the gut, it felt like at the time. And I just felt so vulnerable because it was like the doctors couldn't do anything. I couldn't do anything. No one on this human earth had any power to do anything about this situation. And the only person that I felt like could was God, and he wasn't. And so it was like this super, super vulnerable place of feeling like I felt like the weight of God's power, and yet he wasn't using it for my benefit at all. And so again, like I said, it was just such an evolution to where I would go back and forth feeling like there's no other place for me to run to other than God, because who else on this earth is going to do anything? Or no one. And then going back to being angry, like I had lots of nights when I was just angry and frustrated, but I tried to let myself feel those feelings also. And then eventually we had an accident with Julianne where it was a perfect storm type of situation. It almost felt like God was allowing this to happen on purpose and did this on purpose, because we were walking her outside in her little stroller. And the only reason we had walked was because I had been working all morning, was working from home. I'd been back to work. She was like 4 months old. I came out and my mom was watching Julianne, and I said, hey, I'm really stressed out. Why don't we go take a walk? Well, that morning, my husband had been running late for work. We lived in an apartment complex at the time. And he said, I'm running late. Can you guys take the dogs out for me this morning? So I then was like, oh, we've got to take the dogs out too. So let's go ahead and do all this at once. Let's just go for a walk with the dogs and we'll come back. We're out with the dogs. I had handed my mom the doggy bags. We're out there. My dog had gone to the bathroom. As soon as she had finished, I asked my mom for a doggy bag. She took her hands off the stroller to hand me the doggy bag. In that same instant, another dog and his owner had come out of the apartment building. In that same instant, my dog ran for that dog. So all in the matter of 2 seconds, where it was this chain of events, and my mom took her hands off the stroller. My dog's leash wrapped around Julianne's stroller and knocked it completely over. Julianne didn't fall completely out of it, thank goodness, but she did fall to where she hit her head. We rushed to the ER and she had fractured her skull and she had 2 fractures on her neck. And so they put her in a cervical collar. And that night, we almost lost her. Her breathing was struggling. She was kind of like in and out. And again, I felt like at that point I had tried so hard to make amends with my feelings towards God. And then for this perfect storm to just injure the one person who we were trying so hard to protect. And then to see her laying in that bed and her breathing was struggling. She's coming in and out and we weren't sure if she was going to make it till the next morning. It just put me right back in that place where I was like, I don't know, God, what you're doing or why you're doing it. It was a lot. But again, no one could help. Like no human doctor, no person on this earth could help in that situation. And so it was kind of like, I know that God is the only one that I can turn to right now. And he's not doing anything, but I have to try. Like I have to pray and I have to hope that he's holding us tightly somehow. And I continued to pray about him and about her and everything. And that was a really trying time. The doctors had told us that she would heal. She was in a cervical collar, and they had told us that she would heal within 6 to 12 weeks. But 6 weeks would most likely be the time frame because she was so little. So babies' bones heal a lot faster than ours do as adults. So, luckily she made it through the night and she made it through that hospital visit. And amazingly, she didn't break any of her arms or legs, which is crazy because, those are always, the most fragile for her. But she didn't. Her skull fracture didn't affect her brain. So thankfully her brain was okay. Her spine was okay, other than that fracture on her neck. So they sent us home and I was feeling really hopeful. But then we were supposed to go in 4 weeks later to get a follow-up x-ray and make sure that her neck was healing okay. Well, we went for that follow-up x-ray and they told us that there was no healing. She hadn't healed at all. So he said, you know what, come back in a couple weeks and we'll see how things are looking. It might just be taking a little bit. And I was like, okay. Still feeling hopeful. We left, came back in a couple weeks, got another x-ray, and there was still no healing at all.
Wow.
And so at that point, I was just so confused. And our neurosurgeon then talked to us about what this means for Julianne, which was that because her neck isn't healing, he said he was afraid that maybe this fracture had actually been there before the accident. And there had been scar tissue that developed around the fracture site that is preventing the bone from sticking to itself and healing. And if that was the case, if she didn't heal on her own, then she would have to stay in the cervical collar until she was big enough for a spinal fusion, which would most likely be at the age of 3. And she was 4 months old at the time. So she would have to stay in a cervical collar. He told us the risks of her moving her neck too much, which were paralysis, brain damage, all the slew of scary things that he had to tell us. And he said, there's nothing else for us to do here other than wait and see. I immediately Googled top pediatric neurosurgeons in the country, and I made 3 appointments with really experienced pediatric neurosurgeons for them to look at her scans and tell me what they thought. I had 2 calls with doctors who told me that it was a very, very real possibility that that is exactly what happened, that there was a fracture that we didn't notice when she was little that has now created some type of scar tissue that's preventing her bones from healing. And so they said the same thing. We'd probably have to wait until she's like 3 years old to do a spinal fusion. We got to that point, and obviously things were just really tough. But then 2 weeks after that visit, we went in for another follow-up after 8 weeks of not having any healing on her neck. We went in for another x-ray, and she had nearly complete healing in her neck. So we had gone from our last follow-up x-ray and there being nothing there after having multiple x-rays prior to that showing no healing, and talking to all these doctors, to the following x-ray just showing almost complete healing. And our neurosurgeon looked at me and he was like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's almost completely healed. I guess I was wrong. He's like, that was definitely like a day and night type of change. But, he said, give us another couple weeks of healing time, and I think we can leave the collar behind. Wow. I remember walking out of that doctor visit and walking over to my mom's car, and we just were crying hysterically. Like, just so emotional that had happened. But I think why that was a turning point wasn't because she had been healed, but it was because we had been in such a vulnerable place. And we'd been praying for so long and struggling with my faith and struggling with all of this. And it was like this tiny glimmer of, hey, I'm still here. I think because I had just gotten to the point where I was so broken down by the constant fracture. And then for her to fall and her neck, to almost lose her in the hospital that night. And then to see no healing, and here my doctors tell us that she's going to have to wear this collar for 3 years and all this stuff. And then also her head, which we're still dealing with that, but her skull fracture, this is the crazy part. Her skull fracture actually had a very rare complication, which only happens in 1% of pediatric skull fractures. The surgery to fix it, our doctor said, has never been done on a child with OI, especially not as young as Julianne. So he was like, I don't even know if I can fix it or what would happen if I tried. So all of these hits that we just kept taking, and then to get to this place where it was like this tiny, tiny little glimmer of, I'm still here. I think was huge for me. But it showed me that it's not, I can't wait for a miracle. If I had left my faith up to God showing me a miracle, then he would have healed Julianne the day she broke her arm. This never would have happened, you know? But it's not about that. My faith has to be, I guess, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's like, it's not reliant on what is God going to do for us? What is God going to give us? When is he going to heal us? When is he going to make our lives perfect? And especially in terms for Julianne, I don't want Julianne to see God that way, to where, one day she could fall, or she could be in an accident, or something else could happen where her life is at risk, or something major happens where she's in pain and there's a lot to happen. And I don't want her to look up to the heavens and wonder why God hates her. Instead, I want her to be able to feel those feelings, absolutely, but also understand that God hasn't left, even if you can't feel him in the moment, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Join us next week for part 2 of this episode. There is so much more to examine, and I truly hope you join us. See you then.